Disneyland was freaking great. I don't care if I am in my mid 40s. This is just what I like. It's probably a little weird, but I've never really been cool, so it's just kind of normal for me. Sort of like how most people like football. I've never cared about football. I don't even watch the Super Bowl, not even for the commercials. I just couldn't care less. Heck, the only halftime show I've ever seen in full was Michael Jackson's show at the Super Bowl from 1993. But if you love football, that's fine with me. I just love Disney parks instead. The only bad part about this Disney park has been the same constant negative that's hung over this whole trip, and I'm not talking about the busted Jeep baking in the sun back at the hotel. I'm talking about the fact that I can't text my mom. I can't text her and tell her anything about my day. Well, I guess I could text her, but it'll do no good. Her phone is dead, sitting on her kitchen table where it's been for months. I don't even want to touch it. I've had to stop myself from sending her a message on multiple nights of this trip. But I'll just bury those feelings a little deeper for now. There's still plenty more to do here in Southern California, things like Universal Studios. I couldn't come all the way out here to Disneyland and skip over Universal Studios. Unlike Universal Studios in Florida, this one is a legit movie studio on top of being a theme park. One of my favorite movies, The Burbs, was filmed here, and it's absolutely freaking awesome to go into the Burbs neighborhood where Tom Hanks lived with Princess Leia and expose the nutjob neighbors for the psychopaths they were. Besides the studio tour, there was another must do for Universal Studios: Jurassic Park The Ride. Now it's Jurassic World and seen some changes, but it's still got the same heart. I remember watching a TV special on the opening day of this ride back in 1996. Steven freaking Spielberg himself was here to ride on opening day. Now it's my turn, and Charlie's. We hit this one early in the morning. I guess most people weren't yet in the mood to get wet since we walked right on with no line and sat right in the front of the boat. I was obsessed with Jurassic Park when it hit theaters in 1993. My mom took a 13-year-old me to see it. She hated it just like she hated most movies that I chose, but she endured it like a champ. It was a thing we did on Sundays after church. One week she'd pick a movie, and I'd usually complain about her choice, but she silently suffered through my picks with no complaint. Now I was going to live the movie, at least as much as you can realistically do, and I can drag Charlie along in place of my mom. For some reason, he doesn't quite love it, but I sure do. Blocking out Charlie's misery surrounding Jurassic World, Universal Studios was pretty awesome. I still think I prefer Disney for some reason, but Universal is pretty dang great too. The only annoying thing that happened was the same thing that happens anywhere crowds gather. You know, when you're walking along, about 100 other people are also walking along, and then some moron in front of you decides to stop. Why the brain in certain humans hasn't directed them to walk to the side before stopping just blows my mind. And that happens over and over and over at places like theme parks. I always imagine the people who stop in the flow of walking traffic are probably the same ones who never learned the square block goes into the square hole as a kid, and probably don't use their turn signal either. Other than that, though, it was great. I'm tired, Charlie's tired, the Jeep looks tired, though it's technically just sat in the hotel parking lot for days as we walked around the corner to Disneyland or Ubered up to Universal Studios. The gas station glue is now completely baked to the windshield, along with the millions of dead bugs, but it doesn't look like the crack has grown at all. That's a plus. Besides that and the missing mirror, the deep gouge in the hood, and the donkey dent, it should be able to get us back to Virginia, but we're not ready for that yet. Somewhere in life, I'd heard of the La Brea tar pits. I couldn't tell you if I'd read about them or seen a video. All I could tell you is that I knew it was some kind of tar pit, duh, that it swallowed animals, and that it stinks. I also knew that it was somewhere close by, and I still needed to get out and explore Hollywood for a bit. Traversing Tinseltown sounds easy enough in my head for two tired white nerds, but of course it's not that simple. It took about an hour to make the 30 miles from our hotel beside Disneyland because of the stop and go traffic, but we made it to the Miracle Mile section of Los Angeles where the tar pits are located. People complain about LA traffic, but it's no worse than getting behind Grandma Moses on a 2 lane back road in the South. You know, every time you start to pass, somebody's going to be coming in the other lane, so you're stuck for 20 miles, driving 17 miles an hour while Granny struggles to see over her box of Kleenex that sit on the dashboard. It's the same idea as in LA. But we made it, and there are no slow moving seniors in sight. What's mostly inside is concrete, but I can smell the tar pits. I don't know that I'd say it stinks. It doesn't smell good, but it's not terrible like I expected. It's the same smell I've smelled 1,000 times in my life when it's 95 degrees in the summer with 100% humidity and people that work harder than me are paving the roads. It's hot asphalt. It's not exactly pleasant, but it's not going to make me throw up. What makes the tar pits fascinating are the fossils that have been found here. Animals all through history would get stuck in the tar, sadly suffocating beneath the nasty stuff, and then their bones would be well preserved until somebody decided it would be a good idea to dig around in here. They found mammoth fossils, saber-toothed tigers, even an American lion. I didn't even know American lions were a thing. Presently, there is a kind of tacky display of a family of elephants visiting the tar pit, with the mother being stuck to slowly sink in here forever. It's a little sad and a little dated, but that's the part I like the most. It looks and feels like something that would have drawn people in as a roadside attraction in the early highway days. When we finished up at the tar pits, I decided to check off a weird box from my list of not quite normal interests. There's something intriguing to me about graves and cemeteries. Weird graves, artistic graves, ugly graves, they draw me in. Heck, even my own empty, currently unmarked grave has a weird magnetic pull. Just to know that one day I'll be buried where this grass grows, where people are remembered, but at the same time where nobody matters anymore. It's probably not a healthy fascination, but I can add it to the catalog of other things that I bury but can't forget. None of that is important right now, though. My grave is over 2,000 miles away, but Burt Reynolds' grave is only 3 miles down the road. I might as well pay a visit to Old Bandit while I'm in town. Hollywood Forever Cemetery is unlike any other graveyard I've ever visited. It's peaceful and serene, but still tightly holding hands with Hollywood. Paramount Studios stands right up against the cemetery. There was even a time in the 80s when Paramount employees parked in the cemetery to get a close walk to work. It's not used for employee parking anymore, but the entertainment industry is still present here in a big way. It's considered a cemetery and a cultural arts center. They show movies here in the summer and live music on certain nights. Heck, the series finale of Breaking Bad premiered here, and everywhere you look, you'll find the final resting place of celebrities. Mickey Rooney, Anne Heche, Johnny Ramone, and Bugs Bunny himself, Mel Blanc, are all in various states of decay just under your feet here. You'll find Hattie McDaniel, who played Mammy in Gone with the Wind, buried right beside Chris Cornell from Soundgarden. Just up from all those, looking out over the pond, the ducks, and the picnickers, is Burt Leon Reynolds Jr. His grave stands tall with a life-size bust of the bandit on a tall column. He helped stop the pig squealing in Deliverance, visits Mr. Bean to see Whistler's mother, and races across the U.S. in Cannonball Run. But my favorite Burt Reynolds movie is Smokey and the Bandit. As a 70s comedy, it's better than it has any right to be. It's cool to see that the bandit remains forever here in Hollywood. By weird coincidence, we spotted another grave in the shadow of Burt, Paul Rubens. I guess it's meant to be that we stumble upon the grave of Pee Wee Herman himself after first stopping at the Cabazon Dinosaurs when getting to California, and then making it to Pee Wee's house several days ago. A lot can be said about Pee Wee, but it's mostly said by people who have done much worse than he ever did. I'll always be a fan. After checking out the cemetery, I wanted to go to the heart of Hollywood and check out the Chinese Theater. This is where you see celebrities putting their hands and feet in the concrete. It's also the well-known Hollywood Walk of Fame, where famous people from radio to music to movies get a star planted in the sidewalk. What you don't see in most pictures are the scam artists and bums. I'm used to bums. We've got those all over the place back home. But scam artists are new to me. Or at least they were new to me before I ran into the fake friar back in Memphis. The swindlers here looked a little different than those little monks in Tennessee, but at least this time I was ready. Walking along Hollywood Boulevard, reading the names and stars beneath our feet, and I just so happened to look up and make eye contact with one of these guys. They're like carnies. Once you look them in the face, they pounce. Before I knew it, this big dude, who looked like a Dollar General Biggie Smalls, walked up with a stack of burnt CDs in his hands. I didn't even know people still burnt CDs like this, but this guy had at least 15. He was as friendly as the monk of Memphis, with a smile just as big. That smile must be part of day one swindler training. He gave me some fancy high five that I've never done any time in my life leading up to now and handed me a CD. He immediately took the CD back out of my hands and told me he'd even autograph it for me. I was just trying to be nice, so I smiled back, gave a little bit of a fake laugh, and told him that would be cool. I didn't really want this dude's CD, but he was so excited to talk about himself and about the album that he made. It's all me, he said. I do everything on here. 8 songs, my man. You'll like it. You'll love it, he tells me. I know for a fact that I don't look like I'd love it. This guy's making gangster rap, and I'm standing in front of him wearing a Mickey Mouse t shirt and black shorts showing off my pale white chicken legs. The only rap I listen to regularly is DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, but the notorious BUM is laying it on thick as he hands me the newly autographed CD. Just $40, he said as I took the treasure back into my hand. I really didn't want to pay this dude $40 for the CD, no matter how remarkable it was. Heck, I didn't even want the freaking thing for free. I just wanted to find the handprints from the cast of Star Trek and move on with my life. So I pulled out the classic lie. I don't have any cash right now. Upon hearing the words no and cash in the same sentence together, he snatched the CD back out of my hands, and that big happy smile faded away. Go get some cash and come back. I'll be right here. I'll hold it for you, said the jumbo con artist. This is where I put on the face I should have put on way back in Memphis and agreed just so I can walk away from the missing fourth member of the Fat Boys and make my escape. Thankfully, he didn't notice when I walked back by him 20 minutes later with an armful of tacky and cheap Hollywood souvenirs. He already had another nerdy white dude by this point, and I'm sure we all looked the same, so I was free to check out the boulevard. I still probably got ripped off by the souvenir store, but at least I don't feel so disheartened by that. As much as I've enjoyed traipsing around Hollywood and Los Angeles, I can't stay here forever. I have to slowly make my way home, but at least I don't have to drive straight back to Virginia. I can make some detours along the way, with the first diversion being San Diego, America's finest city. A bit of self righteous nickname given by a mayor of San Diego. It isn't exactly on the way eastward to Virginia, but it's close enough to Los Angeles that I can't resist going. It's also super close to the Mexican border, and there's plenty of Spanish influence in the buildings. At least I assume it's Spanish influence. I'm not exactly a historian of architecture. I'm a moron who makes halfway educated guesses. The main takeaway from these buildings is that they look really cool. I'm sure there's plenty of other things that make it worthwhile to visit San Diego, but I like the oddball stuff. The kind of things I can't see back home. The one thing I'd read about San Diego that really piqued my interest was a cove where seals and sea lions make their home. I've seen seals in a zoo, but I've never seen any out in the wild, so Charlie and I made the hour or so drive down to San Diego. The first thing you'll notice when you get to La Jolla Cove is how awesome it looks. There's buildings and hotels right along the cliffs, but then this cove is left at least a little more natural. It's not exactly out in the middle of nowhere, but once you get down into the cove, you can almost imagine that it is. The second thing you'll notice is the frickin' smell. It smells absolutely putrid here. I believe it's from all the birds and their crap. There's probably hundreds of seals, but thousands of seagulls with dead fish and bird crap everywhere. The third thing we noticed, and this part was probably specific to our bad timing on our trip, was a busload of European grannies with a few grandpas mixed in too. I'm not sure where they were from, but they didn't speak English, which is fine. But they used giant iPads to take pictures of everything, which is amusing. I can deal with the busload of elder tourists. They're just here to do the same thing I'm doing. I can even deal with the stink from the birds. I've worked in a grocery store. I've smelt the people who haven't bathed. These birds have nothing on them. It also helps that I've just never seen a place that looks quite like this in my life. I've been to beaches before, but never a beach at the bottom of a sheer cliff, and I've certainly never been to a beach that's covered in big barking dogs with no hind legs. This is different, and I like it. There are seals and sea lions, along with a sign telling us the difference between the two. Not that I'm smart enough to remember what that difference is. There's lots of barking, some swimming, a little running, but most of them are just laying around. There's not much of what I'd always considered a beach, but every square foot of sand is taken up by a blubberous sea creature. As interesting as the wildlife is, you can't forget about the smell that I've already mentioned a few times. The seals here are a relatively recent addition to the population, only first showing up in San Diego's history books back in 2013, shortly after a committee named the Citizens for Odor Nuisance Abatement was formed. It doesn't seem like the committee reached their goal, as the odor hasn't been abated. It's worth stopping, though, if you're in Southern California. Just wear nose plugs. Oh, and one last tip: don't park along the beach. The parking that's close to the shore is free, and for good reason. Your car is going to get pooped on. There are paid garages within a close enough walk that will save you from getting glazed in guano. I guess it wasn't enough that the Jeep had already been beaten up with an unhealthy number of glued on bug carcasses. Now it was also marinated in seagull crap. I should have expected no less. Leaving San Diego meant heading back east, back towards home, though I didn't have to be in Virginia for a few more weeks. That was great, but I hadn't thought things through enough to have anything planned after leaving California. I'm a pretend grown up. I only act like I have it all together, but that's just a fabrication. All I know for now is that I'd head towards Phoenix. It's early enough in the day that I can make it to the capital of Arizona before dark and maybe find a few things to check out while I'm there. The next 5 hours or so just consist of driving through the desert. It was around 70 degrees in San Diego, but the closer we get to Phoenix, the higher we see the temperature rise. It tops out around 111 degrees. This trip and its temperatures taught me one thing about Jeeps. They look cool, but they aren't cool. Not as far as the temperature goes, anyway. There's nothing really separating my head from the sun other than painted fiberglass and bird poop. That bird poop is probably the only real insulation. We pulled into the outskirts of Phoenix in the early evening. We were tired and hot, but we did find a unique place to stay for the night: the Space Age Lodge. It wasn't anything super fancy. It was really just a dressed up Best Western, but it was cheap and nerdy, which is right up my alley. It was also something that Charlie could enjoy too, as much as a Best Western can be enjoyed. The lobby was a UFO. The rooms were decorated with pictures of rockets and space shuttles instead of the stereotypical generic pictures of the local haunts. There was even a restaurant that served an odd mix of Mexican food and American fare. Charlie got a giant burrito. I got liver and onions. I'm guessing that's not an order that comes up for the chef here very often, but it didn't kill me, so it must not have been hanging around in the walk in freezer for too many years. After we ate, we got back to the room. Charlie dozed off for a while I made a plan for tomorrow. Having no plan to be here, I hadn't read up on anything related to Phoenix until late last night. I already knew that it's the capital of Arizona, so I made a plan to go see the State House. I also found a few graves worth visiting because why not continue to giving in to my morbid curiosity and paying a visit to the last resting place of someone I never met when they were alive and breathing. We started by making a quick morning stop at the grave of Eddie Guerrero. I remember watching Eddie wrestle back in the late 90s. I'd throw on my NWO shirt and watch Nitro every Monday. Eddie kept getting more and more popular before he died of heart failure in 2005. Now, he's resting quietly under the grass and trees of a small Phoenix cemetery. It's still early in the morning, but it's already 94 freaking degrees outside. The trees around Eddie's grave are doing a good job of keeping the heat away, while the wet grass from the nearby sprinklers does a good job of making you think it's cooler than it is in reality. It's a peaceful spot, but it is a bit disheartening of a trip. I always found Latino heat to be entertaining. After leaving Eddie Guerrero's grave, we headed downtown to the Capitol building. As state capitals go, this one doesn't really stand out. I prefer the big domed Capitol buildings, but this is decent enough for a stop. There is some interesting history surrounding the building if you're into that sort of thing. It was originally the home for Arizona's government way back before Arizona was ever part of the U.S., as a state anyway. Before 1912, there wasn't a state of Arizona. Arizona was a territory ruled by governors with historic and boring names like Richard Cunningham McCormick and Frederick Augustus Triddle. Truthfully, I have no idea what the difference between a territory at the time and a state is, and I don't care. At least I can knock a capital off my list if it ever becomes a thing where I'd want to hit up all 50. We've got one more cemetery in Phoenix to hit up before leaving town, and this is going to be my favorite stop. There's a grave here that brings us back full circle to our stop at the Big Texan in Amarillo last week. During that stop, we had that annoying old man sing us some Waylon Jennings, and it just so happens that Waylon is buried here in Phoenix. Waylon's got to be the best there is in country music. He was the king of outlaw country, probably most widely known for the theme song from Dukes of Hazzard, but he had plenty of other well-known songs, including several with Willie Nelson. The songs Waylon did with Willie were probably Willie's better songs. Another tidbit from Waylon's history is that he was meant to be on the plane that crashed in 1959 that killed Buddy Holly. That incident, known as the day the music died, killed Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper. Waylon was in Buddy Holly's band at the time, but he gave his seat to the Big Bopper because the Bopper had the flu. Waylon was haunted by the crash for years, probably for the rest of his life. Before the plane took off, Waylon and Buddy Holly had joked about the cold tour bus that Waylon would be taking instead of the flight. Buddy told Waylon that he hoped the bus freezes up. Waylon replied that he hoped the plane crashed. Unfortunately, it did. Life sure can suck, but you have to find the realistic balance of good and bad. The one thing we all have in common is that we're all going to die. We just need to find some stuff to do before that happens. And now, Charlie and I need to find something a little more upbeat to balance out the visit to Waylon's grave. While trying to plan out the return trip last night, I decided to visit Hoover Dam. It's not exactly on the way, but it's not a major detour, and seeing as how Clark Griswold was a big inspiration for this trip to begin with, the Hoover Dam should fit right in. Clark spent time hanging over the edge of the dam while taking the family to Vegas, while I was just a sophomore in high school. Now it was my turn, minus the part where Clark nearly falls to his death, hopefully. On any normal day, the 4-hour drive from Phoenix to the Hoover Dam would have felt like a whole trip all to itself, but we've done so much driving on this trip that 4 hours is nothing. Heck, that's not too much more time than it takes to watch a Lord of the Rings movie. We made it to the dam with plenty of daylight left in the early evening. Hoover Dam was built back in the 1930s, opening up in 1936 after over 100 men lost their lives during construction. It's over 1,200 feet long, 700 feet tall. Made up of steel and load after load of concrete, it is impressive to see in person. As grand as the dam is, it's really the landscape surrounding the dam that deserves all the attention. The Colorado River carved its way through the rocks here just as it did at the Grand Canyon. I can understand why Clark wanted to bring the Griswolds here. You can stand right at the edge of the dam, looking up at the rocky cliffs and down towards the river far below, where Cousin Eddie had hoped to catch a few fish. Stop here, it is a sight to behold. Just leave your fishing pole at home. And you are allowed to make a dam joke or two. Like I just mentioned when we left Phoenix, there's always a balance of good and bad. Seeing the dam was good, getting back to the Jeep was bad. It was already causing a pit in my stomach every time I saw it, and things were about to get even worse. We left the Jeep in the third floor of a parking garage that you come to when getting to Hoover Dam. I hadn't paid much attention to the fact that the floor of the garage had metal grates that opened up to each floor below. I guess it's to somehow help with drainage, or maybe it was just cheaper than using concrete for the entire floor. We'd parked the Jeep just below one of these grates from floor 4. While we were standing in awe of the Colorado River, someone on the floor above the Jeep had tossed their cigarette butt through the grate, hitting a perfect bullseye on top of the Jeep. I really hadn't even noticed it while walking up to the Jeep. It already looked as bad as Rocky after his bout with Apollo Creed, but I definitely noticed when I got inside. A tiny pinhole had been burnt in the thin roof. Thankfully, it was over the passenger seat. Charlie usually sat in the back seat, so he could totally ignore me, but no matter where the hole was, it wasn't helping me feel any better about this ride. Oh, and you know what a pinhole in a roof does while you're driving? It whistles. For thousands and thousands of miles, it whistles. We stayed somewhere in Utah last night. Nothing eventful happened, just driving towards the next destination until I was too tired to stay behind the wheel. The whistling roof of this POS had helped keep me awake for a while, but eventually even that was no help, so we stopped along the highway to sleep. I'd further solidified plans for this return trip. It hadn't escaped me that we'd left Disneyland several days ago and hadn't really made it anywhere. I'm sure that my subconscious was a heavy influence. Going home meant reminders of who wasn't there any longer. Staying on the road was a way to try and forget it, and it was safer than taking the path of least resistance and eating a bullet. I now had plans to at least get us to Mount Rushmore. I'll figure out the rest once we make it to South Dakota. Around midday, we'd made it to Canyonlands in eastern Utah. Before heading up to view the canyons, we stopped for gas. I was getting low and guessed it would be my last chance to fill up for a while. There was a dollar store across from the gas station, and the thought occurred to me that maybe I could find something to plug the hole in the roof of the Jeep. That nonstop whistling was driving me crazy. I headed in and bought a cheap roll of duct tape. I thought maybe that would do the job. While standing in line to pay, I got behind a guy digging in his pockets for change. He looked like the same kind of human leech that I was used to seeing back home. People like to portray the Appalachians as being poor, lazy idiots who spend their days drugged up. And sure, there are people like that back home, but they exist everywhere. It's not exclusive to any area, no matter what you're led to believe by J.D. Vance. Back to this specific guy, he finally pulled out a handful of change from his pocket. Out fell a little bag of candy. The candy fell to the floor, and the guy froze for a split second. It looked like some badly made rock candy that had been mostly crushed in the dust. I really didn't think much of it at first, but he grabbed it and took off running out of the store, leaving his cigarettes and change on the counter. I was too naive to realize what he'd just dropped, and my brain hadn't quite processed what just happened. The cashier noticed the blank look on my face, and she let me know that he'd just dropped his meth as she brushed his change aside and reached for the duct tape in my hand. The whole incident didn't mean much to her. She didn't miss a beat as she rang me up and followed me outside to light up a Marlboro as I put a piece of tape on the Jeep. At least I can say I've now seen meth. I'm not really sure that's anything to brag about. Now patched up, the whistling stopped and the drive on into the canyons was much more quiet. As grand as the Grand Canyon is, Canyonlands is, at the very least, a close second. There are similarities with its more well-known cousin canyon, such as both being carved by the Colorado River, but Canyonlands has its own flavor. Truth be told, it's what I'd always imagined the Grand Canyon to be, a huge chasm of color in the middle of the desert. Canyonlands undeniably looks like the Old West. I can imagine places like this being the inspiration for plenty of stereotypical Western movies. It also reminded me of Back to the Future Part 3 when Marty and Doc fire up the DeLorean at a drive-in movie theater, only for Marty to show up in the past and find himself being chased away from the time machine by a bear. There's good reason for that resemblance, too. Those scenes from Back to the Future Part 3 were filmed here in Utah, only a few hours away. This neck of the desert was also the location for the crash of the family trucks during vacation. I can see why this part of the country was chosen for those iconic scenes. The views here are unbeatable, and in some ways, this really does trump the better known Grand Canyon. There's far fewer people here, and that fact alone kicks this place up several notches. It feels so much more remote as well, and that's really the star here. Canyonlands gives you that feeling that you are somewhere off the beaten path. There are no tour buses here, there's no designated spot for loudmouths to talk about politics or try to get you to join the church in their basement. It's much more peaceful here. I like this place a lot. It's as if you closed your eyes and imagined a postcard of the Grand Canyon, when in reality it's hours away. I've talked about the death of my mom, but that shouldn't take away anything from the death of my dad. He died over a decade ago, and that one still stings too. He and I had a much different relationship than the one I had with my mom. There were ups and downs with my dad that were never there with my mom, but it wasn't easy to see him go. I think that's the real thing I've struggled with in a different way with my mom's passing. I watched my dad slowly go away over a few months in a hospital bed. There was a little bit of time there that my brain used to adjust. At least that's my best educated guess. But my mom left in a hurry. She'd been texting while Christmas shopping for her grandkids one day. In less than 24 hours, I watched her heartbeat stop. I also wasn't in the room when my dad died. Maybe that had something to do with it too. I'd mowed his yard that morning in May and had just gotten out of the shower when a nurse called. She wouldn't tell me what happened, but suggested I come to the hospital soon. Her words, letting me know that I didn't need to rush, told me everything I did need to know. He was buried a few days later, on my birthday. I've never liked my birthday since. Still, it wasn't easy when either of them died, but somehow life goes on. That's what we tell ourselves. I guess we all tell ourselves that. It's a bold-faced lie, but there is a little truth to it. As those thoughts race through my head on repeat, I realize I've been on autopilot as we left Canyonlands, and we're already traveling through Colorado. The scenery has changed in a big way. Gone are the big brown boulders and dry sandy dirt. Now things are turning green again, with the highway now crisscrossing rivers instead of canyons. There's been a big drop in temperature, too. It wasn't miserable in Utah, but it is much more comfortable here in Colorado. We're just passing through Colorado, though. Our next goal is in West Kansas, but we won't make that stop today. We'll grab some fast food and stop at another cheap hotel for the night before entering the Sunflower State tomorrow. Kansas feels wide open. It's also brown, but a different kind of brown than the desert. Here the roads are dirt and the grass is high, and they're all the same shade of light brown, so you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. But that doesn't mean Kansas is bland. It may be called the wheat state, but there is some interesting stuff here. There's the Cathedral of the Plains, a Romanesque style Catholic church that looks like it belongs more in a cold town in northern Europe instead of in the middle of the Dust Bowl. It was the temporary home of one of the Catholic bishops who gave Catholic bishops a bad name. His escapades had already been exposed by the time he came here, and it wasn't a popular move when he showed up. Thankfully, he's long gone. There's also a giant Buffalo Bill statue depicting how he got his nickname. There's a random Dutch phone booth, because why not? There's a castle on a hill marking the spot where Coronado finally gave up his search for the 7 cities of gold before heading back to Mexico. It's easy to feel like a Midwest Indiana Jones while standing in the castle. I guess that would be Indy's long-lost cousin, like Iowa Danny or something. One of the more interesting spots we came across in Kansas is the official highest spot in the state, Mount Sunflower. It's 4,000 feet above sea level, but you can't tell by standing there. It might be the most remote location that we've been to on this trip, but there are amenities even all the way out here. Maybe it's a stretch to call them amenities, but there's a picnic table, there's a huge mailbox with a notebook inside that's meant for people like us to leave a note along with our names. And lastly, there's plenty of sky. There's more sky out here at Mount Sunflower than I've ever seen in one place. I do like my mountains back home in Virginia, but there's something to be said for so much open sky and seeing for miles in every direction. Kansas ate up most of the day, but at least it feels like we've made some progress. We may not be anywhere close to home, but we've covered some ground since leaving California. This Jeep drinks gas like Michael Jordan was drinking Gatorade back in 1991, but at least it looks cool while doing it. Or at least it looked cool a few thousand miles ago. Now it looks like the banged up Jeep from Jurassic Park. There's missing parts, dents and dings, the busted windshield, not to mention the duct tape patched hole in the top. It's still running just fine though, so there's that. I'm worn out, and I'm sure Charlie is too. We pull into one of those poorly ran chain motels that I booked on Priceline. I think we're still in Kansas, but we should make it to Nebraska sometime in the morning, and then it's on to South Dakota to see the Shrine of Democracy. Laying in bed didn't mean falling asleep, no matter how tired I was. Hopefully, Charlie will grow up to appreciate the stuff he's been able to see. My own dad took my brother and I on a few trips when we were growing up. I'd already mentioned the trip we took to Houston, stopping in New Orleans along the way. We caught a baseball game at the Astrodome and went to Johnson Space Center. He took us to Dollywood quite a bit back in the 80s and early 90s. I remember being scared of the Blazing Fury at Dollywood the first time I rode it. Now I need to ride it any chance I get. It's some corny nostalgia that can be some good medicine. If you've never had the chance to ride the Blazing Fury, I suggest you do it. At this point, it's probably only a matter of time before they take it out for something more modern, but it's one of my favorite rides ever. It's a stretch to call it a coaster, and the thrills are certainly pretty tame, but those old animatronics have a weird charm that's tough to beat. I've been able to take Charlie on the Blazing Fury several times over the years too, so at least he'll have had the same experience whenever they do take it out of the park, just like they took out the classic flooded mine. Sadly, Charlie never got to ride that one. I also remember a trip to Nashville with my dad. I remember walking around the Capitol building and having to pee. My dad told me just to go pee behind a tree, which I did right outside the Tennessee State House. I remember being at the Ryman Auditorium, the original home of the Grand Ole Opry. My dad was enamored by the place, but I couldn't have cared less back then. I just didn't get it, but now I would appreciate that more. That's par for the course on any of those childhood trips. I didn't appreciate them then like I do now. If you're around the same age as I am, you grew up playing the Oregon Trail. It was just part of childhood in the 80s. Part of the road to a better life in Oregon ran through Nebraska, and one of the stops in the game was at Chimney Rock. It just so happens that Chimney Rock is on our way to Mount Rushmore, and seems like a stop I should make. I want to see this place in real life since I've seen it 100 times on a green computer screen in my life. Getting there is more driving through classic Midwest scenery. I'm not sure if this is the plains or the prairie or neither, but it's a change from what I'm used to seeing back home. Whatever this landscape is called, I like it. I like Chimney Rock too. Even from a distance, I can recognize it. The mountain and rock formation look just like they did in the old game. Looking around, the whole area feels straight out of the Oregon Trail. There's even an old wagon here and a few signs warning us to watch out for rattlesnakes. Thankfully, we seem to be safe from dysentery. From what I've read, there was once a town here, but it's been gone for over a century. The town had been a popular spot for fur traders, growing to even have its own post office at one point. The rock was taller back then too, but erosion, lightning, and even errant cannonballs from battles fought here have taken some height over the years. Just a few hours from Chimney Rock stands a more modern monument. This one has only existed since the 1980s, but it's no less epic than Chimney Rock. Carhenge is a replica of England's Stonehenge, sorta a replica. I'm guessing the word replica is probably used pretty loosely here, but Carhenge stands as a stunning testament to roadside entertainment. There are some Cadillac Ranch vibes going on here in Nebraska, but Carhenge is definitely its own flavor. There are 39 cars buried here. A few are Cadillacs, but there's so many other types here too. Everything from a 1975 Gremlin to a 1950 DeSoto. They aren't all arranged to look like Stonehenge. Some are used as art and sculptures on site, like the Ford, Fourd, Seasons. It's a group of old Fords with two stacked end to end in a pretty impressive display. There's also a station wagon that's been reimagined as an Old West wagon, and even a spray paint ready car that pays homage to the Cadillacs near Amarillo. This feels like a place that Clark Griswold would have stopped if he ever took another trip to Wally World. Carhenge has even made its way into mainstream a time or two. It was the location for an episode of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, if you remember that show. It's also on the cover of the Best of Steely Dan. I guess the dudes in the band were fans, or maybe somebody working in an office at MCA around 1992 just thought it looked cool enough to be on an album cover. Steely Dan isn't here now, but Charlie and I are here, and so is a friendly white-haired lady. The lady walks up and asks where we're from. She continues asking if we're enjoying the cars. She seems friendly, but at this point I'm flashing back to the CD scammer in Hollywood and that phony monk in Memphis. By the time she starts trying to tie a friendship bracelet around Charlie's wrist, I'm really feeling those Memphis moods. She's a friggin' scammer. She looks like she volunteers at the library. She looks like she makes baby blankets and donates them to the hospital for newborns. She looks like she sells homemade candy at the craft fair. She looks like all those sweet things, but in reality, she's standing in a field in Nebraska, ripping off people like me who don't know any better. Well, now I do know better, and I'm not interested in giving her $20 for a bracelet she bought in bulk off Amazon. Thankfully, Charlie didn't want a bracelet either. He's a 16-year-old. He wasn't really interested in wearing her junk, and I wasn't interested in wasting our time. He'd already politely told her no thanks and pulled his arm away. Luck was on our side this time, as she hadn't grabbed him or his manners would have kicked in and he'd have stood perfectly still. He kept walking as she kept trying to ask questions, reaching for my wrist in an attempt to cuff me while asking how our trip had been. I wasn't about to be rude to this lady and make myself look like a jerk to the handful of my oblivious fellow tourists, so I gave her a few answers, but I kept my money. I should have told her that I already donated to the cause back in Tennessee, but I kept my bad jokes to myself and left without a bracelet. I was pretty proud of myself. I certainly felt better after leaving Carhenge than I felt when I left Memphis. It was also kind of nice that she didn't throw anything at us like the lady back in Texas. Maybe luck is on our side after all. You want a tip for the future? Never start thinking that luck is on your side after all. The border into South Dakota isn't far at all from Carhenge. There's more to do here than just see Mount Rushmore. There's weird stuff like the Corn Palace, a concert venue that's covered entirely in corn. Every year, local university students decorate this building with local corn to create different designs. It might sound lame, but it is impressive in person. Farmers nearby grow corn in 12 colors just to be used to dress up the Corn Palace. And it's free. Free helps. Then there's the waterfalls and Sioux Falls. It's probably not a shocker that these falls give the city its name. It's not often that you see waterfalls right in the heart of civilization. Then there's the Badlands. This is one of the most stunning landscapes I've ever seen. It's a sight that's not easy to describe. There's canyons here, vaguely reminiscent of those back in Utah and Arizona, but South Dakota puts its own twist on things. It's a marriage of desert and prairie with sand and tall grass, craggy hills and evergreens. It's unexpected and expansive. Unexpected is also a good word to describe the animals that have lived here throughout history. Fossils from alligators to horses have been found here, but even stranger are the rhino and camel bones that have been discovered out here in the Badlands. More modern times have left their mark on the Badlands too. It was a location for that 90s movie Dances with Wolves. It's not hard to see why someone would choose this place to set a big budget movie. All of that is great, but we really came here to see Mount Rushmore. It's one of those major American icons, right up there with the Statue of Liberty and the White House. You probably don't really need a description of Mount Rushmore, but it's a mountainside with 60-foot tall carvings of heads of 4 U.S. presidents. There's George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and old Abe Lincoln. It's pretty freaking remarkable, and one of those things that needs to be seen at least once in your lifetime. Mount Rushmore has been all over pop culture, showing up in North by Northwest, one of those national treasure movies, and even Superman 2, kinda. It's also been on more boring things, like stamps and coins. And there was even a toothpaste commercial about brushing Roosevelt's teeth. It's worthy of being the main event of another week on the road. But like anything, Mount Rushmore has its detractors. Some people see it as a blight on the landscape, but everyone is entitled to their own wrong opinions. There's still plenty of untouched black hills around, and let's be honest, not many people are coming here just to see the trees anyway. The sculptures on the mountainside bring in loads of people and loads of cash. Standing here now, I can attest to the fact that it's worth the trip. You're able to get much closer than I would have ever guessed. Being so close to these four giant old man heads has made it worth all the while to have taken such a detour on our route back to Virginia. But like every other stop, we can't stay forever. Oh, and you remember how I mentioned how luck was on our side? Well, when we finished marveling at the presidents of Rushmore, we headed back to the Jeep. It was beaten and bruised, it was taped and glued, and now it was dead. But we can end this just like the VHS release of Back to the Future Part 2 by saying, to be continued.